Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and in today's video we have a large suite of Mythic Plus nerfs that have come in. First of all, we have Algathar Academy, the overgrown ancient boss. Increase the amount of time between abilities, particularly in relation to Burst Forth, which is the thing that makes all the ads show up. Developers note, the combination of Germination and Burst Forth is the most dangerous part of this encounter. We hope by giving this moment more space, players will be able to better prepare for and recover from it. Now there's a Wowhead post that does a little bit of a deep dive into this, which originally they reported that Burst Forth was now 14 seconds after Germinate, up from 6 seconds. But in fact, they've done some further reporting here. Mystical OS, who I believe is the DBM creator, if I'm not mistaken, that says the behavior of the burst cycle is entirely unchanged to its timing after Germinate. The cycle itself is just slowed down. So basically, instead of the big combo happening every 50 seconds, it happens every 60 seconds, or actually every 57 seconds, up from 47 seconds. But you still have the exact same time between the Burst Forth and the Germinate. So this text here is all wrong. All this. So I guess you still have an increased window to kill the Ancient Branch and clear your stacks that way. But you don't actually have an easier time of killing Lashers before they become active. That second set of Lashers that gets brought up still gets brought up very quickly after it summons. But there is an important change here of moving this to a 1-minute cycle instead of a 50-second cycle. It means you can use 1 minute on pull and have them back for the first Burst Forth. You can use 2 minutes on pull and have them back for the second Burst Forth as well in high keys. So it is a sizable nerf on those side of things. Azure Blade, increase the time it takes for Azure Blade to drain their mana. Azure Blade's mana is the mechanic that causes them to go into the middle of the room and do the intermission phase, so slowing that down is good. This is 5 to 8 extra seconds in the first cycle, and in the subsequent cycles, 10 extra seconds, an extra Arcane Orb and Arcane Cleave, but notably not an extra Summon Draconic Image, which is nice because that would be a mechanic that sort of slows you back down a little bit. So about 20% extra uptime on the boss. Pretty relevant for that encounter. A boss that's already been substantially nerfed a few times earlier in the beta, or not in the beta, but a couple weeks ago. But still one, of course, that is I think welcome. I think still one of the medium difficulty bosses, but in one of the harder dungeons, I'd say. So I'm pretty happy to see nerfs landing on Azure Vaults in general. Naka Defensive. They nerfed the Let Fly spam, but they've also nerfed Raging Tempest by quite a bit here on the Energy Surge damage and the Lightning Strike damage. They've also buffed Surge of Power, which is going to make it a lot easier to maintain a 10 stack as well. You'll be able to have 3 extra seconds to grab a new orb and refresh your buff, so actually a pretty sizable change to that encounter. Also, the Tira and Maruk boss, they have added a delay to Quickshot after Tira uses Gale Arrow, which I believe is... Okay, there was a Wowhead post about it, but I didn't have that one opened up for this. But basically, you're going to have like 4.5 seconds before the first quick shot deals damage after Gale Arrow, up from like 2 seconds. So it should give your healer a little bit more time to, maybe put 1 global into topping the whole group, and then put 1 global into saving whoever's being targeted by a quick shot. Ruby Life Pools, they've nerfed the absorb value of Ice Bulwark, which is what she casts twice throughout the fight. And they've also nerfed the ticking damage of Chillstorm by quite a bit. So that fight was actually a fairly tough fight. Not surprised to see the little nerf landing on it. And then Urquhart Stormvein, the last boss, they are nerfing how badly you get kicked by interrupting Cloudburst, and they're also nerfing how frequently Storm Slam is cast, which is something that does murder your tank from time to time. Okay, yeah, that's not listed in this post, but definitely still I think a pretty welcome set of changes, especially as we move into Tyrannical Week. This dungeon was a particularly tough Tyrannical dungeon. I think it still will be, even with some of the other mechanics of all 3 bosses. Temple of the Jade Serpent, you can now line Sha Eruption from the Lesser and Malformed Sha. They've also nerfed how frequently Sha of Doubt will cast Touch of Nothingness, and Witherwill will now prefer targets that are not under the effects of Touch of Nothingness. Let me see if they have... Okay, they don't. These nerfs aren't listed here. I think Witherwill is just like the AOE dam. like the boss just kind of blasting everybody. I'm actually not 100% sure on how that works. Let's take a look. Shaw of Doubt Dungeon Journal. Dungeon Journal. Shaw of Doubt NPC. Okay, so if you ever want to know what a dungeon journal is, you don't have the game open, you can do this. You can wowhead a boss or whatever, and then you can just go into the encounter journal this way. So Witherwill, yeah, okay, blast 2 random players. So now those players aren't going to be the players that have the Touch of Nothingness dot, which will massively reduce the damage on those players. Interesting. And then finally, we have a nerf that came into Court of Stars after that blue post. And this nerf says that basically there's about a 34% nerf to the damage intake if you are being hit by the boss, but not the ads. Now, the way this works is that you take extra damage if you're within 7 yards of either the boss or an ad. That deals extra damage. The general strategy, especially for melee and most keys, is to stand within 7 yards of the boss to be attacking the boss. But you don't have to stand within 7 yards of an ad. Now, if you're ranged or you're standing outside the range of the boss, if you're doing kind of a high key strategy of making sure that you're not getting hit by any of that bonus damage, the nerf is slightly smaller, but still, this is a very large nerf to this boss. This is a challenging boss. It's a boss with a high HPS check, but it is in a fairly easy dungeon relative to the other ones. And so this does make Court of Stars. This kind of removes the hard part of Court of Stars. Now there's no hard part of Court of Stars, which I'm kind of torn on how I feel about that. I think that the easiest dungeons are relative to the rest of the field create some pretty nasty problems for keystone pushing. Oh, sorry about that sound. Looks like I got a Windows update ready. Where, the keys. Okay, so like if you're pushing the rank 1 title in a season where there is 1 or 2 easy keys and 5 or 6 medium or hard keys, the way that score works right now, where you get so many points for depleting a key, the meta is just to spam a lot of keys, time a lot of high Court of Stars and Shadow and Burial Grounds, and deplete a lot of high other keys, and that's not, I think, a particularly fun or satisfying optimal strategy. But, of course, having some nice easy keys in the rotation means that if you're somebody who's looking to, like, secure a plus 20 for your Great Vault, it's nice that there's an easy thing you can roll into, and that actually, roll your key into that and then get that reward. So I do understand the value there, but yeah, particularly for these sorts of changes, making Court of Stars and Shadow and Burial Grounds relatively easy, or I guess Shadow and Burial Grounds is unchanged, but making Court of Stars relatively easier does make it less likely that I'll be interested in pushing that title this season, because I did not enjoy that being the strategy with like Junkyard last season at all. There's another angle of this as well, which is that a lot of the changes we're seeing here are nerfing the HPS and the like healer skill checks of the fights. So I have some takes here from Cryptix, who says, I feel like some dungeon nerfs are justified, but there isn't a living check anymore except for some one-shots and a high enough key, slowly just becoming a DPS check whether you time it or not. So this is not even saying like, hey, the healer skill issue. This is saying like, hey, DPS pressing defensives challenge has been removed from some of this, and I do empathize with that. Similarly, JB, well-known tweeter / fantastic MDI player, of course, M+ player, says, it's not fair that Blizzard keeps making their healing checks so easy that only DPS and tanks get to deplete keys by being bad. I feel left out, which I do think is fair. I mean, I think that it's fair that, there were these mechanics where healers were the question mark in your group, right? If you had a bad healer, you'd wipe them. If you had a good healer, you'd kill them. The thing is that unlike the mechanics, there are some things where it's like, okay, if we have a bad DPS, we're going to deplete this key, but we will eventually beat it, right? If you have a bad healer, you get all the way through your Court of Stars, and then you can't kill the boss, right? There's no Blunt Somni buff. You can obviously keep resetting Lust and spamming it again, but there's no way that you eventually get to finish that key and walk out with loot. So I think that there's this pressure, especially from like pugs, from lower keys, from people pushing that just want the loot from the end of their dungeon, where like, hey, if there is a mechanic that is hard on healers, that's going to be the kind of mechanic that not only prevents us from timing the key, but prevents us from completing the dungeon entirely, and therefore those mechanics get a lot more pressure from the community to get nerfed, versus things where it's like, hey, this dungeon has a tight timer, we need really good DPS to time this, right? Those sorts of things are like, well, if we deplete the key, we still get our items out of the end of the dungeon at least, right? And so it kind of dampens the pain versus when you just like realize you have to hearth out because the boss just has you beat. That is a very, very negative experience for a lot of groups. So I'm not sure what I'm proposing as an answer to this. Maybe the answer is just something like a Bwansamdi buff again, where once the keystone is depleted, you can get 10% damage and healing and health and something and get over the finish line and actually get your loot out of the end of the dungeon. And that way we can still keep these tougher healing checks in. Maybe there's something where the healing could be like the damage of the mobs and the health of the mobs right now scale at the same rate, but perhaps that could be adjusted and the healing check could go up faster than the damage check to make it so that in high keys there's more to do. Although, there's a lot of people with the opposite perspective that it should change the other way around, and a lot of that's going to depend on like what sort of healer you're playing with. Because like right now, if you were making an optimal M plus group and you only had a limited amount of skill, gear, knowledge to assign to your players, historically the answer would be to take some points away from your healer and put them onto your tank, right? Or put them onto your DPS. But to, if you were being optimal and you didn't have just 5 great players, you weren't Echo, right? And you could only put a limited amount of skill points into your team, you would take the points away from your healer and put it into the rest of your group. And these changes kind of move back towards that being the way that Mythic Plus works, right? Whereas at the start of the season, it was actually kind of true that you actually wanted your healer to be one of the better players in your group, which was rare. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a huge solution planned for this or anything like that. I definitely understand why these sorts of nerfs are important for, people pushing keys and for pugs and stuff. These mechanics were really nasty in those circumstances. And it's hard to imagine a world where there are mechanics that are not nasty in pugs, but are interesting for JB, right? I don't know what the answer is for that, but it would be a really cool problem to solve if they can. I suspect, though, at the end of the day, they're just going to end up working towards solving the problems for pugs more and having JB have interesting healing for the first few months of for the first few weeks of the season where there are a couple of outliers, and then fixing those outliers, which, that might just be the best answer given the options they have. Anyways, little monologue / stream of consciousness aside, hope you've enjoyed this video, this look at the M plus changes that are coming. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you think I'm way off on my assessment of how all these things interact with each other. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.